Meal times should be a time of enjoyment and connection. However, if you have a picky eater, then sometimes the power struggle can be very real. And today I have my guest, Kerry, who is a nutritionist, and we are going to dive into some tips to help families overcome picky eating in early childhood. In our most sleep deprived moments, our children will teach us exactly what we need in order to learn and grow into who we were created to be. These are the loving lessons we will learn whether we were wanting to or not. I'm Irene Googe, your sleep coach, and I'm on mission to educate parents on how to help their young children sleep. Welcome to the journey. Hello, and welcome to the Loving Lessons Learned podcast. I am super excited to introduce you to our special guest today. I have Kerry Lett with Milestones Pediatric and Maternal Nutrition, and she is a registered dietitian and a certified lactation counselor, passionate about helping growing families navigate life and achieve all of their milestones along the way. She works with women who are trying to conceive, pregnant, and breastfeeding women and children to help manage medical conditions, tackle picky eating, and establish a good family relationship with food. And so she's here to be a trusted nutrition resource for your growing family. Carrie, thanks for being here. And I'm so excited to dive into this topic today.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
I love that you talk about having a good relationship with food because I know that was a struggle for me. And I know like one of the sleep principles I share with families is talking about eating essentials and establishing feeding. And so I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how you got into this work before we dive into what we need to know about establishing good feeding.
Yeah. So I originally decided to switch from being pre-med to studying nutrition because I wanted to help prevent diseases in the first place instead of just simply managing them through medications. And I always knew that I wanted to work with kiddos. I originally wanted to be a pediatrician. And when I just started learning about the maternal disparities in this country, I was like, wait, we're missing a piece of the puzzle here. Of course, it's important to care for our kids and make sure they're getting a healthy start from the get-go. But also, if we're not caring for mom in the way that she deserves, then she's not going to be able to care for her kids. So to me, it just made sense to care for both women and children together and do both maternal and pediatric nutrition.
I love that. I love that so much because when I didn't realize when I was pregnant with my second son, I ended up qualifying for a study with Duke. And it was really me learning about the division of responsibility with the Ellen Satter Institute. And I
Mm-hmm.
think you kind of cover some of those things in some of your education that I've heard you talk about. And I was really fascinated, like how much of it was like, if I eat well, then my kids will eat well. They're going to do what I do, what I
Mm-hmm.
tell them to do. Is that what you find as your experience when you work with families?
Yeah, a lot of times the apple doesn't fall so far from the tree. So, I mean, there is a genetic component of picky eating that sometimes we see that if certain families, the parents are a little bit more kind of predisposed, maybe they have sensory or textural issues, then the kids might be a little bit more predisposed to have that as well. But of course, if we are constantly serving a certain diet to our family or certain foods to our family, then that's the foods that they're kind of used to and comfortable with. So I do think that if we can eat well together as a family and have a varied diet that supports our nutrition, then kids are more likely to learn to eat that way too.
Yeah. Carrie, what mistake do you think parents make when it comes to feeding their little ones?
I think the biggest one I see is just applying pressure. I think we feel that I don't have kids, but I would say as a parent, I see all the time that we are worried about our kids. Of course, we want
Mhm.
them to grow, we want them to thrive, we want them to do well. We know fruits, veggies, proteins are all good for them. And we want them to eat those things. And we start letting our concern impact the mealtime. And we start saying, oh, well, you have to take X number of bites before you leave the table. Or if you eat this, then I'll give you this treat later. Or if you don't eat
Mhm.
that, then you don't get this. But having all of that pressure at meal times really just creates like a tug of war scenario. Kids will start pushing back. They don't get to control much, but they get to control what goes in and what comes out. And they'll use that. So really, if we can take away the pressure, maybe sit on our hands if we feel like we're like trying to have the spoon come to our little one's mouth, or keep our mouth not talking about food, instead talking about our day, it can really make a huge difference if we just start there and make the environment a more pleasurable place to be so we all can enjoy our meals.
Yeah, that's such a great point because I think what you said, I grew up in a household where it was like the clean plate club.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Same.
like everything was having to be eaten. And then like if I didn't finish eating it, it would be at my next meal. And so it
Mm-hmm.
was like this unhealthy relationship that I ended up having with food. And I think what was super helpful for me to realize with that study that I was a part of, it was like, nope, my kiddos get to decide if they want to eat and how much they want to eat. My job was just to serve it up. And I was like, oh, this is so hard.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it was having to shift my mindset. I'm wondering, do you work with families about that piece when it comes to their feeding choices?
Yeah, I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle, that we all have different relationships with food based off of how we were raised. Like you said, I was a part of the clean plate club too. Or if like food is very emotional, a lot of times we seek it out during times of stress or times of emotion. So a lot of times we have to kind of change our own mindset and our own relationship with food and rethink how we're going to kind of structure our meal time so our kids have a healthy relationship with food and they're learning to trust their bodies and listen to their hunger and satiety cues, and not kind of develop the maybe poor relationships that we may have developed.
Yeah. I will say one of the things that I find a lot of times parents are surprised that I talk about this with them is like we talk about what our meal times like. And if there's a power struggle during meals, then chances are there's going to be a power struggle that bleeds into bedtime
Mhm.
because it's these like unhealthy patterns that we can find ourselves engaging into these power struggles. What tips and tricks do you have to share with families to help avoid some of those power struggles?
Yeah, I think really it's starting with thinking about, what does mealtime actually look like in your household? What, like, take a step back, act like you're a third party sitting at your table and really just take it all in. Because if we can understand like what's happening, then we can dive into why it's happening. If we can
Mm,
address the why, then we can start to help. So that might be coming up with like a rule list for everyone, like a family food rule list, that we're not going to bring electronics to the table, that we're going to sit at the table for X number of minutes, that we're not going to talk about food, we're going to converse. Maybe it's when we're getting frustrated and we feel like we want to start applying pressure, or we're having like an emotional response to our kids eating, maybe we need to take a step away. So I think kind of figuring out what's going on and then why it's happening and how we can kind of manage that in a healthier way, so we start having a kind of more positive experience at meal times again.
yeah,
No
I love the
pressure.
pause to just observe,
Mhm.
take it all in, see what's happening. What you mentioned earlier about picky eating, that sometimes it can be genetic in terms of like maybe some sensory issues and things like that. Would you say, like with picky eating, is that something that children can overcome? Can toddlers, preschoolers, or adults, can they overcome picky eating?
Yeah, definitely. I think the earlier we intervene, then the sooner they're going to overcome it. Um, just because we can get into a bad cycle with picky eating where we start to just cater to their likes and dislikes, and we just know that they're going to eat chicken nuggets, so we're putting that on the plate every single time, or we are having that kind of poor food environment where there's a lot of pressure, or just not really setting our family up for success. So the earlier we can intervene, the sooner we can start making progress. I do always tell parents that I wish I had like the magic wand that I could be like, and we like all foods, but it doesn't quite work that way. It is a long struggle. It does take a long time to overcome, and especially if there are texture or sensory issues, or if we're on certain medications that are suppressing our appetite, it takes a lot of time to work through those struggles, but we can make progress. And all the families that I work with do leave with the tools where they can continue to make progress even after our appointments end, and start adding new foods instead of just dropping foods time and time again.
That. So, what do you do with families? Because I know like you sometimes work with toddlers and preschoolers around feeding. This is a season of parenting that sometimes our little ones become picky.
Mhm.
I was really shocked to learn like it wasn't about like what kids eat in that mealtime, especially with like toddlers and preschoolers. It was like kind of looking at like what do they eat over a week? I was
Mhm.
like, that was like a very eye-opening aha moment because like I was putting a lot of pressure on every single meal with my kiddos. And so learning that was a game changer. Um, how do you work with families and how can you support them through some of the picky eating?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the age really plays a big role in how we help, because it is natural for kids once they turn one that their appetite decreases. They're growing at a slower rate than they were during infancy. And so we do kind of expect that their eating would slow a little bit. Also, a lot of times they front load their calories. So they eat more in the beginning of the day and they eat a little bit less at the end of the day. Again, not necessarily every kid, but most kids.
Mhm.
So I think, like you said, taking into account kind of what's going on throughout the whole day, what's going on throughout a week, and really making sure that, first of all, that they are actually displaying like picky eating habits, or maybe it's just that their appetite's decreased or they're not as hungry at dinner time, and that's why it looks like they're a little bit pickier. So I think kind of figuring out if it truly is picky eating. And then from that point, then our process is typically working with the food environment, figuring out like the mindset issues of the parents, working with how can we make mealtime no pressure, how can we make it a positive environment for everyone. A lot of times, like the toddlers, the little ones have trouble sitting in their seats, so how can we get them in their seats, so we can all kind of be at the table and have that food exposure. And then we start kind of working through the sensory and the texture issues, if they have any, to start slowly kind of building their comfort around trying new foods through food exposures, food chains. We have food explorer groups where they come and they cook and they garden and they do all kinds of fun activities around food just to get them comfortable around food. So really it's, can we set our home environment up for success? Can we look at the foods that they're liking and see how we can kind of build towards our nutrition, our health goals, or even the parents' goals? And then see how we can continue that progress. So we're adding variety so that we're not dropping foods.
Talk a little bit more about the Explorer group. Like you guys do gardening and cooking together. What does that look like?
Yeah, so our Food Explorer group is for our kids 3 to 7 years old. It meets during the summers, 2 Thursdays and 2 Saturdays every month. And every group is different. We have a kids garden in the back. We have cooking style classes. We have food play style classes. So it really just depends, but it focuses on fruits and veggies with the goal that we've got kind of 5 kids that are all a little bit of a picky eater coming together to kind of overcome their fears and reluctancies together. So, for example, this past Saturday, we just did a raspberry and strawberry class. So we made pancakes with raspberries and strawberries. So we teach them how to use their senses to explore the food. We get them involved in making the food in this case. And then we're just kind of there together, having, again, working on that kind of environmental, like how do mealtimes look? How can we have a positive relationship with food?
Yeah. Carrie, I wonder, are the parents a part of this or is it just for the kiddos or what does that look like?
Yeah. So really, I leave it up to the parents. Certain kids do better when the parents are there. Certain kids do better when their parent is not there. We do have the parents in the room so that they can kind of see the strategies that I'm implementing with the kids so that they can kind of mimic that at home and take that home with them. But some parents are very involved and they're helping to cut things or help their child like do the food exploring with them, like smelling it or putting it on their tongue. Some parents are just kind of observing. So it really just depends on the family as to what works best for them.
Got it. I think that was one of my, like, it sounds a little bit similar to what we were doing with the study. And just, I was really excited to learn some of those strategies because, again,
Mhm.
like growing up in the house, I didn't have all the tools. It was never introduced to me like that. And so it was having to retrain my brain and how I was going to connect with food and what I was going to teach my kiddos about it. So a lot of new patterns and habits to establish.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's
Carrie,
also a good time for like parents to kind of realize that they're not the only ones struggling with this too. Like a
oh,
lot
yeah.
of times the parents will start kind of talking and be like, wait, you're struggling with that too? Like, how did you over? So it's like they get the opportunity to not only learn from what
Yes.
tools we are implementing and strategies we're implementing during the class, but they also get to connect and feel that support and community too.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a great point because, again, like when you are in your parenting bubble, you can feel very alone in the struggle. And then it's like, when I'm working with families, whether it's like sleeping and all, they're like, am I the only one dealing with this? I'm like, no, there's a whole bunch of people that are feeling sleep deprived and having power struggles all day long. And we're all trying to learn, how do we stop engaging in those power struggles? So
Hmm.
there's some skill building happening for sure. Carrie, you said something earlier. You said you said there's habit. Like, how do you know if you have a picky eater? What are those habits that would let a parent know? What is it? Like, how do I know that my child's a picky eater?
Yeah. Yeah, we all have different food preferences. That's completely normal. We all have our favorite foods. Mine is chocolate. We all have
Ice
our foods
cream.
that we that's a good one too. We all have
Painfully great.
like, yeah, we all have our foods that we like more, foods that we like less. So I think just understanding that not every person and not every kid included is going to like every foods. So I think having a realistic expectation of what a child that is picky looks like versus a child that just has food preferences. Again, we all have food preferences. Um, and then also, again, thinking about the, especially the little ones, like the timing, like, is their breakfast going really well and they eat a lot during that meal, but dinner's just a little bit more selective because if I wasn't that hungry, of course, I would eat my favorite things on the plate too and leave the rest.
Mm,
Most people would. So again, I think it's kind of looking, like you said, at the full week, looking at the full day, not just focusing in on like, oh, they're so picky at dinner, they won't eat anything, but like, what are they eating the rest of the day? Or kind of what's happening at dinner, particularly. Maybe it's not that they're picky, maybe it's just that dinner's a little bit more chaotic or stressful, or their sensory cup is like overflowing from school. So kind of thinking about everything that's kind of going on. And is it just one meal that's a struggle versus every meal is a struggle? And
mm.
it's just sometimes, is it all the time? Really kind of figuring out it might be something else that's making it look like they're picky when in reality, it's not the food that's bothering, it's something else is bothering them.
That's such a great point because one of the things too you were talking about earlier, like how kids kind of front load with food earlier in the day, and by the end of the day, it's like they're just getting tired. Like I find when children are tired, they don't eat well. Like they're
Hmm.
just like, I'm ready for sleep. I'm not really ready to eat, and it's more exhausting for them, and they can get more worked up and kind of cranky during meal
Yeah.
times, especially if the timing can be off. And sometimes noticing that do you work with families also when they're like starting solid foods? Can you talk a little bit about the age range and do you work with parents too? Like, cause you mentioned maternal nutrition as well. So who are you
Yeah.
working with? What does that look
Yeah.
like?
Yeah. So, I work with women that are having hormonal imbalances, whether that's PCOS, endometriosis, even if they're not trying to conceive, just because that's something that I kind of have a specialty in. So I love helping with that. I also help women with around pregnancy, so fertility, pregnancy, and then I say up to 2 years postpartum. But if they've been working with me, I would never get rid of them because at that point, they're family.
Yeah.
But typically if it's parents who are older and we haven't worked together before and they're wanting help with like menopause support or weight loss or another health issue, then typically that's another provider. Typically, I'm just kind of working with hormonal issues and
The
other than
postpartum
menopause
season.
and yeah, around pregnancy. And
Hmm.
then for kids 0 to 18 is my range. So
Okay.
the day that they're born, if they're having trouble gaining weight, if they're having trouble with breastfeeding, all the way up to graduation day.
Okay. So, Carrie, I do have to ask. I work with a lot of families sometimes that might struggle with bottle feeding. Sometimes they're trying to nurse and bottle feed. Do you help work through some of that with like latch?
So that is not me. I
Okay.
would love to have those skills, but that would be more of like a feeding therapist or an SLP that would have the latching skills, if it's like specifically with the bottle.
Got it.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
my role in that is more making sure that we're growing properly and that we're getting the extra supplements, especially if we're like premature, that we're getting all the vitamins and minerals that we need to kind of make up for being a little bit early.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. That's really
Yeah.
helpful for parents to know. And I'm wondering when they do start solids, do you have any tips for families? Because sometimes my experience has been there's a lot of pressure to kind of like feed the babies a lot of food so that they will sleep well.
Mhm.
I know that's a myth, and I think you know that's a myth too. But a lot of parents can feel really like, oh my gosh, they're not eating enough. And I usually share the guideline of like, food is fun before one. I don't know if you have any words of wisdom or guidance for parents that might be in that infancy season.
Yeah. I think especially with like your first child, I found that you feel like you need to, you might be excited. You're like, oh, a new milestone. We get to do this together. But also you need to do it perfect. You want to do it right.
Mm,
But remember that there's no right way to feed your child. You can do purees, you can do baby-led weaning or baby-led feeding, you can do a combination. There's no one right way. Every family has a different way that's right for them. And know that there's no perfect way. Perfection doesn't exist. It's not going to be
yes.
perfect, and that's okay. Um, I like to say start slowly, build gradually. And our goal is if we can, I like to say introduce 100 foods before we're one. So kind of getting that variety in there. Of course, there are certain things that we try to make sure we're including from like a nutrition perspective and a food allergy prevention perspective, but really just again, slowly building over time, remembering that's not going to be perfect and seeing how many foods you can introduce.
That's such great wisdom. Such good wisdom to be shared. And so, Carrie, if somebody is looking to connect with you, where can they find you? And do you have any resources to share with families?
Yeah. So our website's probably going to be the most helpful, milestonesnutrition.com. On there, we have our blog and there's free ebooks. There's other resources on there. We've got all of our information about what we do and the insurances we accept. You can book a free discovery call on there to talk to myself or Natalie, who's our lactation consultant directly. Of course, we're also on social media. I try with social media. I'll say I'm not perfect. I know perfection doesn't exist. I'm taking my own words.
Yes, yes.
um,
No perfect parents here. That's
yeah.
it. None of us exist.
Yes.
Can't happen.
But yeah, that I would say the website or social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest. But yeah, that's the best places to find us.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to share the links to all of that down in the show notes. And there is going to be a link specifically to your picky eating book that you wrote. Can you share any inspirations or tips or tricks that parents will find in there?
Yeah. So the picky eating ebook kind of covers what I like to call my from yuck to yum protocol. Really just guiding parents through the steps that we would implement during our one-on-one sessions so that they can try to implement those at home and see if they have success or if they need extra support and need to reach out. So it will talk through how we can get our food environment in a good place, talk about how frequently we need to be feeding, what we should be offering, and then start kind of building on how we can introduce foods and kind of look at what our kids like and what they don't like, and really kind of see what their food preferences are.
I love that, from yuck to yum. That's so good. So good. All right. Well, Natalie, I could probably talk to you all day. We can dive into all the good things around getting feeding established so that our little ones can then sleep well. I want to talk about the top 5 loving lessons you learned just in your personal journey. And so, do you have a favorite product or service that you love?
Yeah, I would say the reusable snack bags is like my
Oh,
favorite product currently. I
I
just feel
like
like,
those too.
yeah, easy on the go, eco-friendly,
Yeah,
all
it's
the
all
things.
around. I like that. Awesome. What is your best self care tip?
Practice mindful eating. I feel like we're really good as a society at multitasking, that we feel like we have to do a million things at once, including when we're eating. But if we can sit and enjoy our food and the company that we're eating with without distractions, I think that goes a long way for both like our social connections, but also just our health and our well-being.
I love that. Yeah, I still have to work on that one a little bit here. What is something you thought you would never do or say?
Bird watching.
Bird watching. Tell me a little
Yeah.
bit about that.
As a kid, I was like, oh, old people watch birds. And then here I am, like with my bird app, like looking at my bird feeder, tracking birds. So I do it now.
Love that. I actually really enjoy like listening to the birds during my like
Mhm.
grounding walk. I'll go outside and I'm just like listening to the birds.
Yes, it's so peaceful.
It is. There's actually a bird like my husband and I, he says it's the I need you bird, like the little call. It sounds like I need you, I need you, I need you, I need you. Thanks for sharing that, Carrie. That's really cool. What is one thing you really want parents to know, walk away with and know around feeding and nutrition, like something that like should be their one big nugget takeaway?
Yeah, I would say progress, not perfection.
Mm,
We talked about earlier, like no parent is perfect, no feeding journey is perfect, but if we can continue to focus on small positive changes, then that can go a long way.
love that. One of my favorite mantras. And what's one thing you have learned in your entrepreneurial journey?
I would say adaptability is key.
True
I started,
story.
yeah, I started in 2020, right during COVID.
Oh,
And so I came in with this great game plan of what my business was going to look like and how I was going to market it. And then COVID was like, no, just kidding. So adapting, being open to new ideas, being willing to change, I think has been something that I've learned along the way, even though it's hard for me. Still working on it.
yeah. I think we're all a work in progress. And I think that's good wisdom to share, whether it's for small businesses or in parenting. Adaptability is the way to go.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie, for being with me here today. And we'll look forward to connecting with you in the next show. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for tuning into today's show. You can see all of the details and show notes below. And as you go out into your day, I hope that you'll make it your mission to be calm, confident, and rested as you lead today. Sweet dreams.